The difference between Shaul HaMelech and King David was very simple. Shaul was a perfect human being. He was a tzaddik. David was an imperfect individual. And let's take a look at King David's lineage. I'm going to bring out what you said, but I'm going to bring it out in a long way to explain. And this goes to King David's whole history. Look at King David's yichus. And this is also the part where I want to talk about Moshiach. Where does the Messiah come from? Where does Moshiach come from? His lineage. You would think that Moshiach's lineage, he comes from the greatest line of rabbis that there are. That his father and his grandfather, his great-grandfather were the greatest rabbis in the history of the universe, all the way back to Abraham. That's what you would think. And we will talk about it now, how Mashiach's lineage and King David's lineage comes from murky depths. Starting with the story, the first story about Mashiach is what? When? Which story? Who?
Lot and his daughters.
The story of Lot and his daughters, right? Everyone familiar with Lot and his daughters, yes? In brief, just to refresh your memories, Lot was a person who escaped the inferno of Sodom and Amorah, and his daughters thought that he was the only person alive, and they slept with him. The first daughter slept with her father, and she named the child Moab, which means Me'av, which means from my father. That is where Messiah comes from at his roots. That is where King David comes from at his roots. The next stage of that is, anybody? Who?
Judah and Tamar.
Yehuda and Tamar. The story of Yehuda and Tamar, which means basically that Yehuda, the fourth son of Yaakov, he thought he was sleeping with a prostitute on the road, and it turns out that it was his daughter-in-law Tamar, and he made her pregnant. He didn't know that. He thought he was sleeping with somebody else, and then he was embarrassed when he couldn't find her the next day. And 3 months later, rumor has spread in town that Tamar is pregnant, and Yehuda has no idea who it's from. So he says, let her be killed because she's basically tied down to a man. And as she's being sentence is being carried out, she's being burnt alive. Right before, she sends a message to Yehuda. The person who impregnated me is the owner of this signet ring, which was Yehuda, and Yehuda realized that he is the father and she's correct, and he stopped the execution. He married her and he had children with her, and that's how Peretz and Zerach were born, the forebearers of the Messiah. Yishai went under the chuppah with a woman who he thought was his maidservant, but really the person there, actually it wasn't the chuppah, I'm sorry, it was in the bed already, because he didn't need to marry, he was already married to his wife. It was in the bed. She just switched places in the bed. In the bed, when she was there, simply Nitzevet went into the bed and he had relations with her and he made her pregnant. And when she became pregnant 3 months later, her sons were very, very angry because everybody knew that Yishai had separated from his wife, which meant only one thing, that she had betrayed her husband. They were very angry at her. Her husband was furious. When the child was born, they called him David. Different to the other boys, different personality, different charisma, and they prayed to God that he be killed by a lion or by a wolf, and they made him a shepherd far away from them. Anytime something went wrong, they blamed David. This is how David was born. Out of this whole inferior kind of thing, that with a background. Right? This was his lineage. And this is where Mashiach comes from. By the way, just to answer the question, why is Messiah from this inferior lineage? Because the whole idea of Mashiach, of Messiah, is coming to purify the world. He's coming to make the world a better place. And therefore, at his source, he needs to be of inferior lineage so that he can adapt to the world and fix this inferior world. But getting back to King David, so his lineage was, by the way, till 27 years old. David only lived till 70. Till 27 years old, everybody thought that he was a mamzer. If you look at chapter 69 of Tehillim, it says, Mamzer hayiti livnei, I was a bastard to my brothers. He says, I have more enemies than the hair on my head. I had so many enemies. Everybody hated me. Can you imagine the poor guy needed so much therapy, trauma, psychedelic workshops. Poor guy. But this was King David, and this is what the Talmud says. This is what made King David into a king of Israel.